Hello everyone and welcome, my name is Thundernumel and I welcome you to the channel. The new Vernalizer fairy archetype got revealed yesterday and I have a few thoughts about it to share with you guys. It's an earth fairy archetype based on discarding and special summoning from the graveyard, with many insanely powerful effects and a big restriction locking you into only using earth effect monsters for the rest of the turn. Before we get into analyzing the Vernalizer archetype, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel if you enjoy this type of content. Almost 80% of you that watched my last video are not subscribed, so what are you waiting for? Let's start off the review with Vernalizer Fairy of Hills and Blooms, a level 4 Earth Fairy effect monster with 200 attack and 2000 defense. Its effect reads: you can only use the first effect of this card's name once per turn. First, you can discard this card and one other monster or Vernalizer Fairy card. Add one Vernalizer Fairy card from the deck to your hand, except Vernalizer Fairy of Hills and Blooms. Then you can special summon one Earth monster from your graveyard, but you cannot activate monster effects for the rest of the turn except Earth monsters. And second, Vernalizer Fairy monsters you control cannot be destroyed by card effects. All of the Vernalizer Fairies share a similar theme. They all discard themselves and another monster or a Vernalizer Fairy card to do something, and upon doing that thing they get to revive one Earth monster from the graveyard, also locking you into only using Earth effects for the rest of the turn. As a bonus, they all have some sort of field effects. This one is a searcher for the archetype, and if you're playing pure, this is a mandatory 3 of. If you're gonna be using this as an engine card, it could be used to search some of your other pieces. At a first glance, you could be looking at this card and seeing that it's a big neg. But do keep in mind that even though it discards itself and another card to search, that's only a neg 1 in card advantage until you special summon the monster that you discarded with its effect. That means that you special summon any Earth monster from your hand and also search any Vernalizer Fairy with its effect. Next up is Vernalizer Fairy of Forest and Awakening, a level 4 Earth Fairy monster with 900 attack and 1800 defense. Its effect reads: you can only use first and second effect of this card's name each once per turn. First, you can discard this card and one other monster or Vernalizer Fairy card. Send from your deck to the graveyard one Earth monster that can be normal summoned or set. Then you can special summon one Earth monster with a different name from your graveyard, but you cannot activate monster effects for the rest of the turn except Earth monsters. And second, you can target one Vernalizer Fairy monster you control. Its current attack becomes double until the end of this turn. So far, the second effect isn't anything to write home about since your Vernalizer Fairies are weak in attack department. But do keep in mind that with the first effect, it doesn't prevent you from special summoning itself from the graveyard. It only prevents you from summoning the card that you sent off of its effect. This means that this card gives you extra graveyard setup and also special summon of any Earth monster you discarded with its effect, or just special summon of itself, which is a level 4 body on a field that you can do whatever you want with. I think this card might be played in the pure variant of the deck, but not necessarily as an engine piece though. Next up we have Vernalizer Fairy of Flowers and Fields, a level 3 Earth Fairy effect monster with 600 attack and 1600 defense. Its effect reads: you can only use first effect of this card's name once per turn. First, you can discard this card and one other monster or Vernalizer Fairy card. Add one Earth monster from your graveyard to your hand, except Vernalizer Fairy of Flowers and Fields. Then you can special summon one Earth monster from your graveyard, but you cannot activate monster effects for the rest of the turn except Earth monsters. And second, your opponent cannot target Vernalizer Fairy monster you control with card effects. If you have Vernalizer Fairy of Hills and Blooms and Vernalizer Fairy of Flowers and Fields, your monsters will be untargetable and indestructible, which is pretty neat protection if I do say so myself. But Flowers and Fields and Forests and Awakening do work well in tandem with each other. You can send anything to the graveyard with Forest and Awakening and then pick it back into your hand with Flowers and Fields. But if you were to play those cards as engine pieces, it would probably brick your deck. It does give you an easy access to Vernalizer Fairy of Hills and Blooms, which is pretty neat in a pure variant of the deck. And it does get insanely scary because you can special summon a Fossil Dyna or a Morphage slot or just the Earth Barrier statue and make it untargetable and indestructible by card effects. Next up is Vernalizer Fairy of Mountains and Melting Snow, a level 3 Earth Fairy monster with 1100 attack and 0 defense. Its effect reads: you can only use first and second effect of this card's name each once per turn. First, you can discard this card and one other monster or Vernalizer Fairy card, draw one card, then you can special summon one Earth monster from your graveyard, but you cannot activate monster effects for the rest of the turn except Earth monsters. And second, you can target one Vernalizer Fairy monster you control. It can make a second attack during each battle phase this turn. If you're gonna use a Vernalizer Fairy engine in your deck, then look no further than Vernalizer Fairy of Mountain and Melting Snow. This card is basically an upstart goblin that gives you a special summon of any earth monster from your hand, giving you extra consistency and extension to your deck. Now, before we get into the spells, let's talk about which archetypes can abuse this engine. The first one that my mind immediately jumped to is Madolche. And if you have the bear and an owl in your hand, you can use the effect of bear discarding the owl to draw a card, and you can special summon the owl with the effect of bear. From there you can use the effect of owl banishing the bear to special summon a Madolche from your deck, and that should be your full combo without committing to your normal summon. Not committing to your normal summon is important because if the play gets interrupted by Ash or something, then you can possibly normal summon Madolche and do the entire combo anyways. Also worth noting is that the additional copies of bear in your deck are small world bridges, so you get a little bit of extra consistency with your Madolches. If you're so inclined, you could also play them in your Earth Machine deck. Same thing with Small World applies, and you get the free special summons of any Earth Machine. Now do keep in mind that it locks you out of using the non-Earth extra deck monsters, which means no Hulky Fibrex. But if you can build a deck that only revolves around Earth monsters, then it might be ideal for you. Some other archetypes worth noting that could play this as an engine would be Gokis and Scraps. But in Gokis you would get no Isolde effects, and in Scraps you would get not to play the Chronograph Sorcerer or Hulky Fibrex. Moving on to the spell card of the archetype, Flower Crown of the Vernalizer Fairy, a continuous spell. Its effect reads: first, Earth monsters you control are treated as Vernalizer Fairy monsters. And second, once per turn, if a Vernalizer Fairy monster in your hand would discard itself and one other card to activate its effects, you can make it only discard itself instead. It's a pretty nifty card that allows your other monsters' effects to apply to your non-Vernalizer Fairy monsters. And one thing to take note of here is that even though with this card's effect your non-Vernalizer Fairy monsters are treated as Vernalizer Fairies, they are still their original archetype as well. So if you for instance have Flower Crown of the Vernalizer Fairy face up on the field and Madolche Promenade sat in your back row, even though your, let's say, Madolche Hoodcake is treated as a Vernalizer Fairy, it's still a Madolche monster, meaning that you can still successfully resolve Madolche Promenade. Moving on to the trap cards, we have Calendar Rotation of the Vernalizer Fairy. A normal trap which reads: you can only use first and second effect of this card's name each once per turn. First, target one Vernalizer Fairy monster in your graveyard, either add it to your hand or special summon it. And second, during your opponent's turn, if you have no cards in your hand except during the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, special summon as many Vernalizer Fairy monsters with different names as possible from your graveyard, but return them to the hand during the end phase. An interesting play you can do with this deck is making an IP Masquerena on your turn. Even though it's not an earth monster and you can't use its effects on your turn, you can still use them on your opponent's turn. So you can use the effect of Calendar Rotation of Vernalizer Fairy, special summoning many Vernalizer Fairies from your graveyard, and then using the effect of IP Masquerena to link them away to something useful. The first effect is just basically back to the front or monster reincarnation, and it's nothing to write home about. Moving on to the last trap card, it's Vernalizer Fairy and Flower Buds, a normal trap that reads: you can only activate one card with this name once per turn. Target face-up cards your opponent controls up to the number of your Earth monsters, special summoned from the graveyard with different names. Return Earth monsters you control to the hand equal to the number of targets, and if you do, return those targets to the hand. The only thing to take note of here is that this card says up to, so you do not have to return all of the Earth monsters that you returned from the graveyard to your hand. It's a neat little searchable piece of interruption that could come in handy. But as I mentioned previously, as it stands right now, the best way to play the archetype would probably be pure. Fossil Dyna, Barrier Statue and a Morphage Slot are really insane cards that prevent your opponent from playing the game. And having an indestructible, untargetable Morphage Slot or Fossil Dyna is one of my worst nightmares. We'll just have to wait for more support to see if this archetype will get any better. But as it is right now, they are possibly a good engine in Madolche, possibly good pure, and not good anywhere else. If you're gonna play a pure variant, you would probably want to include World Soul Carbon, as it's a monster that searches any of your Vernalizer Fairies. You could probably splash in any number of Tron the Disciplined Angel into the deck, as it's a free special summon whenever you discard a monster. But it's probably not needed, as Vernalizer Fairies are good at spamming the field. And that's all I've got for you today. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel, because I'd like to make more videos for you guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!